The Panthers last year, boy, oh boy, what an offseason they had and what a regular season that they had. So last year, where we were at this point, a couple months prior, they decided to, you know what, we're going to make a big splash move. They decided to go up from the 9th overall pick and then trade up to the 1st overall pick with the Chicago Bears to go and get their guy. Some thought it was going to be, it was going to be CJ Stroud. No, it was the 1st overall pick from Alabama, Bryce Young. So, okay. At the time, I thought, okay, he might be he could be a decent pick for the Carolina Panthers, even at 1st overall. But man, once you get to the regular season, the move quickly blew up in David Tepper's face, and it wasn't necessarily all of Bryce Young's fault because yes, he really struggled as a rookie. But when you look at that whole team around him, especially with first-year head coach Frank Reich coaching him, they were horrible. They were really bad. They were unwatchable for a lot of the year, en route to the worst record in the NFL at 2-15. Frank Reich gets fired, not even close to the end of the regular season, probably after Thanksgiving, if I remember correctly. And yeah, the worst part about it all was you end with the worst record in the NFL that year, and you don't get the number 1 overall pick. Talk about a double whammy of ouch if you were the Carolina Panthers. So now you went to the offseason pretty much facing a relative unknown. How are you going to try to build this team around Bryce Young, your 1st overall pick, going into an important second year, but you didn't have a lot of resources to work with, other than maybe a little bit of money, I guess, but not a lot of draft capital. So looking at some of their offseason events for the Carolina Panthers, because they had to do some serious adjusting here, because they fired their head coach Frank Reich before the season ended, and they fired their general manager Scott Fitter for fucking up that trade. So they did those two things, at least for now, a little correct, I guess. They promoted their assistant general manager Dan Morgan to the proper position, general manager. They removed the assistant tag, and they made a in-division move by snatching away Bucs offensive coordinator Dave Canales to become the head coach. So Dave Canales, some of you may know him for revitalizing Baker Mayfield last year with the Bucs. Now he comes over in hopes to try to figure out how can I revitalize, how can I have Bryce Young have a breakout second year. So that'll be interesting to see. Some other things that you might want to know, that they traded away their franchise tagged edge rusher Brian Burns to the Giants. I guess they unfortunately could not come to a long-term deal between Burns and the Panthers, which is unfortunate for their pass rush. And they made a player-for-player move, getting receiver Deontay Johnson, but they unfortunately trade one of their best corners in Dante Jackson to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So a player-for-player move. For the Panthers, some of the other moves that they made in free agency, they added the likes of Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis to that offensive line, although they massively overpaid them, which was kind of interesting if you think about it. And then on the other side of the ball, on the other side of the line, you look at guys like A'Shawn Robinson and Jadeveon Clowney in hopes of trying to replace Ryan Burns in the pass rush. And also as well as linebacker Josie Jewell from the Broncos. So on top of losing Brian Burns, you also lost Frankie Louvu, one of your other top linebackers. You also lose edge rusher Yudu Gross-Matos for the 49ers. So some of them were key losses, others not so much. But in the draft, that's where the Panthers did a lot of the dirty work by getting Bryce Young some much needed help, like receiver Xavier Legette from South Carolina, running back Jonathan Brooks from Texas, and defensively corner Chau Smooth Wade at Washington State. So the Panthers overall, when you look at their offseason, I was very doubtful of them. I was very doubtful of them despite the limited resource that they had. No first overall pick, but they actually had a decent offseason, a close to solid offseason. Now, they may have overpaid greatly on their two guards. Like, I think one of them has a 5-year, $100 million contract, if I'm correct. Like $25 million a year? Wow. Very surprising. But their draft turned out to be better than expected. And again, despite not having a first overall pick. So those draft picks seem to be pretty good, doing good so far in those OTAs and minicamp. And while it's just that, Bryce Young at least has something functional to work with compared to all season last year, where he had practically nothing to work with other than Adam Thielen last year. So at least he has a kind of receiving core for now, and a kind of running back, I guess. So when you look at the Panthers going into 2024, obviously the top goal for them is Bryce Young needs to show improvement. See, now that you have a kind of supporting cast in slightly better protection up front, Bryce Young needs to show that he has to improve. He has to show that with the new head coach, he has to rise to the occasion. So for the Panthers going into this season, looking at some of the key games, I don't expect them to compete for a playoff spot, at least not right now. So they're years away from that, but their games in this evaluation season, it's always important, you know. So some key games here, like going up against the New Orleans Saints in a division matchup in week 1. Let's see if you can make a first impression within the division. And then you come home in your home opener to face the LA Chargers against Justin Herbert. And then you go a couple weeks later to the Chicago Bears. And some people are touting this as a coveted matchup between two number 1 overall picks from the last 2 years. This year was Caleb Williams, and last year, Bryce Young. We kind of had this matchup between the Bears and the Panthers last year, and look how that turned out. There's a reason why they're not in prime time this year. And then the following week, you get to host the Atlanta Falcons, another key divisional matchup for both sides, and we'll see where they stand there. So looking at some of the things I'm a little iffy on for Carolina this year. One of those things is in their cornerback room. He doesn't get talked about a lot much when I talk about Panthers on Cold Lasagna. And that's J.C. Horn. J.C. Horn got drafted by the Panthers a couple years ago, and he hasn't played a lot. He has a sketchy injury history, and it's starting to show. Actually, it has been showing for the Carolina Panthers. Even before he got, again, going back to that sketchy injury history, he's had it in college, and now it's going into the NFL. I really hope that he can stay healthy for most of this season because they really need him. They really need J.C. Horn to stay healthy. He can play. He can certainly play. He's a playmaker. But the problem is his ability to stay healthy. He's injury prone. So if the Panthers can't get out of that, then they need to find a replacement in the offseason next year. And then my last bit is, like, can Dave Canales get anything out of Miles Sanders? Because Miles Sanders, when he came over from the Philadelphia Eagles last year, he didn't get the same player that he was in Philadelphia. And I'm not sure why. Because by the time we got to late in the season, he was benched. He lost a lot of playing time to Chuba Hubbard. And now you see that they drafted another running back on day 2 in Jonathan Brooks, but he's not expected to be ready because he's still recovering from a torn ACL. But head coach Dave Canales can use this time to hopefully instill some confidence back in what should have been their starting running back in Miles Sanders, because Miles Sanders is getting paid a lot of money to be a starting running back, and yet he's not playing like one. So overall, owner David Tepper, actually was hands off a little bit, at least from what I'm understanding, for once, and let his new head coach, his new GM, actually do their own business. But the Panthers, they should be a little bit more competitive this year, at least on paper. But that's all going to depend on how Bryce Young does in what's going to be a key second year for the Carolina Panthers.